Okay, we're live on YouTube from the forests of Japan. We are in the final verse of the 11th chapter of Phaladipika by Mantreshwar, which is one of the most respected and important classical works on astrology in Sanskrit. The 11th chapter is titled Stri Jataka, which means female-specific horoscopy. The final text, which we will cover today, is the bridge into chapter 12. So if you remember, chapter 10 was about marriage. Chapter 11 was about female-specific interpretation modifications, like the 8th house is a little bit different in a female horoscope than in a male horoscope. That's the primary difference. So chapter 10 is about marriage. Chapter 11 is about the wife. The previous chapter is about marriage, but kind of from the husband's point of view. Chapter 11 is about the woman's point of view. Chapter 12 is going to be the combination of male and female. Make a baby. So chapter 12 is going to be about babies. Not babies themselves, but production of babies. Childbirth. So this final text in chapter 11 is a segue or a bridge into that topic. So we'll get a kind of like coming attraction of what chapter 12 will be like. However, this particular text that we cover today seems to me to be Mantreshwar repeating something much older, because it doesn't exactly have Mantreshwar flavor to it. And it's not particularly clear. But we will make sense of it and see what he's talking about. But all that intro is just there to let you know that this is going to be the whole topic, actually, for the next few live streams. We'll be having babies. And without further ado, let's see what we got. The 11th and final text. I did the wrong special effect. There you go. And let us make it a size which the viewers can see. Shita jyotishu yoshita nupachaya sthane kujene kshite. Jatam garbhaphala pradam khaluraja syad anyata nishpalam. Drishtesmin guruna nijopachayage kuryan nishekang pumang. Atyaje samaye shubhadhika yute parvadika lojite. First line. The first line of this is Shita Joshti Yoshito Nupachaya Sthane Kujene Kshite. What does it mean? Shita Jyoti is a word for the moon, because Shita means cold and Jyoti means light. So moon is like the sun, except the sun's light is hot and the moon's light is cold. The nighttime is cool, right? So actually the moon is just reflecting the sun's light, so the heat is very absent. Therefore it is named Shita Jyotishi, in the moon, pertaining to the moon. Yoshita. Yoshita means somebody who has a yoni, in other words, a female. Upachaya sthana. Upachaya sthana. Sthana means a place. Rajasthana. Kazakhstan. Sthana is place. Upachaya means something which is building up higher. So the Upachanastanas are the places where things build up, where things accumulate. Those are known to be the 3rd house, 6th house, 10th house, and 11th house. Now if you say unupachaya, it means non-upachaya. So it means in any house except the 3rd, 6th, 10th, and 11th. So it will not, if the woman's moon, actually, if the moon is not in the woman's upachayas, and kujena ikshita, if the iksha or the aspect is via kuja, it's from Mars. Mars? This is interesting. Of course, I gave you the heads up that this is about fertility. Mars, fertility? Non-upachaya fertility? Interesting. So far, what the first line says is a woman when the moon is aspected by Mars and not in her upachaya. So he's talking about the transiting moon. So in other words, if you're female and your ascendant is Aries, then the moon shouldn't be in the third sign from Aries, Gemini, 6th sign from Aries, Virgo, 10th sign, Capricorn, or 11th sign from Aries, Aquarius. It should be in some other sign. And it should have the aspect of Mars. This is what he said so far in one line. Stephanie suggesting maybe Mars is the desire to produce, maybe something else. Much more basic, but good thinking. It doesn't really apply for art making. My dear friend Paul, you'll see why. Wait till you see the next line. Of course, you can apply it to art making, however, but you wouldn't then need the influence of Mars. And I'll explain why. If it's for art production rather than child production, maybe it would be better to have Mercury or Venus aspect. But soon you shall see why when you look at the second line. Jatam garba phala pradam khalu raja. That's why. Raja. Jatam garba phala pradam khalu rajasyad anyatha nishpalam. Now, Chinmay Bhagwatji, do you know what the word raja means? Maybe it's a little antiquated, and I'm not sure if they still use this terminology in modern languages of India. Raja. Anybody want to say what raja means? Any person? Meanwhile, I shall give hellos to Johnny Barker, the great ascetic Johnny Barker, Mona Lisa. So Ayo Ataha says maybe Raja means active. No. Maybe because you're thinking Rajaguna. But no. Alf says king. Vana says king. No, that's not Raja, that's Raja. Dawn also thinks Raja. You guys have to learn to hear the difference between vowels, which is maybe not so important in other languages, but is extremely important in Sanskrit. The difference between and ah, they're two different vowels. Actually, they have the same root vowel, but they're different letters. Samurai says maybe darkened. Yeah, that is closer. Oh, well, nobody knows. Or maybe those who know are for some reason embarrassed. This is actually a good movie. There's a good movie on Netflix called Padman. And the play on word is Vana Lisa says blood. Vana, very good. There's a good movie on Netflix called Padman, but it's a play on words for Padman. And it's about a man who sees how overpriced the sanitary napkins are. Sanitary napkins. And so provides them at a reasonable cost to women. And the whole part of the show is how embarrassing the whole subject is for some unknown reason. So yeah, that's what it means, Raja. Raja means darkened or colored. Colored. This is what passion does to the mind. It colors the mind. Or darkens, makes it a little bit more opaque. Translucent instead of transparent. So it distorts the mind, it colors the mind. So hence Rajaguna is described as a passionate mode, but Rajas itself doesn't mean passion. It means coloration. Darkening and reddening, and also Rajas means reddening. So reddening means menstruation. So that's why it's not really just about any old art production, but it's specifically about making babies. So now he's talking about, he's going to use this verse to time when the female is fertile. And therefore when the man should sow the seed to have a baby. And so this bit from the first line about the moon being not in her upachaya, of being aspected by Mars, is the time at which the menstruation begins. Okay. Jatam Garbhapala. So Jata, Garbhapala. What's Garbhapala? It's a baby. What does it literally mean? Fruit of the womb. The garba, or the womb, will produce its effect, will produce its fruit, Phaladipika. The thing that illuminates the results, the fruits. The light on fruit. Phaladipika. Jatam garba phala pradam. This menstrual cycle will result in a baby. The fertility is tied to the cycles of menstruation because it's tied to the reduction of the egg. So in this, you can have basically one pregnancy per cycle if you're super, super fertile. Now, of course, you have to separate the gestations because the cycles don't run once one gets fertilized. But what he's saying is you have a cycle, and no baby. But when you have a cycle that starts, means the bleeding starts on when the moon is, that's why Mars is blood. So if Mars, or the blood, is affecting the moon or the mother when the menstruation starts, that cycle is going to produce a very viable egg. It's going to be a fruitful bleeding, to be literal. The bleeding will make the way for the next egg. The bleeding makes the way for the next egg. So if this bleeding happened when Mars was there, then this blood was successful. The next egg will be good. That's the idea. Non-upachaya, it's not holding onto anything. Upachaya holds onto something. The menstruation gets rid of something. So apparently the concept is get rid of everything perfectly nicely so the next one can come in and settle in comfy and be cozy and inseminable. Jatam Garbhapalam Pradak Kalu. You'll get a fruitful conception. Rajasyat, if the menstruation happens under those conditions. Anyata Nishpala. If the menstruation happens in other conditions, nishpala. You don't get a fruit. This day and age, nobody likes kids anymore, so they probably want to use this verse the opposite way for this so-called rhythmic birth control thing. But in usual conditions, human society loves children and welcomes them and wants more of them. So they try to actually wait for the one that will be fertile. Let's see, Drunken Tarot says something. I was going to think of doing this with my wife, but I didn't have time to check it. I just checked my chart. When I got pregnant with my third child, during my period, I had Mars and Moon. Not? Both. I had Mars and Moon both in the 4th house. Very good. Very interesting. It's also not just interesting, but it's pretty impressive that you remember that detail. Okay, now I think we're on the 3rd line. Or let me make a few notes about this. So what he said so far is that a woman can definitely obtain a fruitful conception only so definitely only. At other times, maybe. He's not saying that you won't get pregnant if this isn't the case. But if you want to definitely get pregnant, then the only time for you to definitely get pregnant is under these conditions. When the menstruation happens when the moon is aspected by Mars and is not in her upachayas. Now, if you try to think about this, that's funny. That's funny, but different women are different, Drunken. Some are just so fertile that they don't have to track nothing. It just happens. Anyway, enough diversion. If you think about this and try to put it into practice, or imagine yourself putting it into practice, it's a little confusing. Let me see. I have notes here about it. The thing is, moon aspected by Mars means what? That if it means the aspect of the transiting Mars to the transiting moon, like Drunken Tarot. Like Drunken Tarot had the moon and Mars in Cancer, which is nicer, in the 4th house. Maybe that's why you had a girl, in Cancer in the 4th house. So in that case, you see, it's Mars affecting the transiting moon. So maybe that's what he means. But if that's what he means, then that means that there's certain months. Let's see, what would it mean? Mars would come, the moon would come. Maybe this is not too much of a problem, now that I think about it. It would mean that what it basically would mean is you would see a statistical spike in birth rate, a very noticeable statistical spike in birth rate, in a pattern. The pattern would look like this. Or it probably would look like bonk, 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 bonk. That would be your spike pattern, because that's Mars's aspect pattern, including its conjunction. Bonk, bonk, bonk. Nothing, bonk, bonk, bonk. Nothing. But we don't see that. I mean, everybody would then know that was a pattern. So that leads one to think that maybe he's not talking about Mars affecting the transiting moon. Maybe he means Mars affecting the woman's natal moon. Or the truth of the matter is maybe he's unclear on purpose, because it could mean both. But if you actually think about it carefully, how many times and when will the moon come into aspect from Mars? Think about this carefully. Is it a certain amount of times per decade? Is it a certain amount of times per year? Is it a certain amount of times per month? Is it a certain amount of times per day? think about it carefully. How often would the moon be affected intensely by Mars? How rare is it? Does it happen every day? Does it happen every month? Like the moon will go through the upachayas every day. I hope you know why. Because upachayas are houses. So houses rotate every day. But how often will the moon get affected by Mars? Is it going to be on Mars' schedule? Very good, Jennifer. So it would be monthly. And depending how many peaks do we have? We have a peak for the conjunction. That's one. We have a peak for the fourth house aspect. That's 2. And we have a peak for the 7th house aspect that lasts all the way through the 8th. So that's 3 and 4 and something else in between. So actually, let's say the 100% aspect from Mars to the moon is 1, 2, and then, wow, 30. How many? 30 degrees from 7 to 8. Moon moves 13 degrees per day. So 2 or 3. So 5, but also anything coming close to those peaks, we can count for an extra one. So we can say 2, 2, and 3. So we should have 7 days per month. And actually, that sounds pretty right. And actually, I'm wrong about the statistical peak. This statistical peak, therefore, should get distributed. Because the moon's month is 28 days, 27 and change. Or whatever it is. Yeah, the moon's month. What is the moon's month? Is it 27 or something, or is it 30? The phase cycle is 30. The phase cycle is 30, but the movement around the sun is 27. So in either case, it's not perfectly in sync with the calendar months. So it will distribute. It won't be. You won't just say like, "Oh my God, what is this weird thing? Kids are born always on the 5th of the month." Well, 15th, 16th of the month, always on a pattern. It wouldn't be like that. So it is actually statistically acceptable that this could be the effect to the transiting moon. See, the moon is weird. The reason why I'm thinking, what is it, 27, 30? It's 27 point something for one type of cycle, and it's 30 days for another type of cycle. One of the moon cycles is from a particular phase to another phase. So let's say from a full moon back to another full moon. That takes 30 days. There's 30 sunrises in between those. But the other cycle would be for it to go from Aries back to Aries. And that doesn't take 30 days. It's faster than 30 days. It's 27 and something. That's why there's so many nakshatras, 27 and something. So the reason for that is that the moon is moving along with the earth. So it's not just its own movement, but it's pushed by the Earth's movement. So it moves a little bit faster in reference to A than it does in reference to B, the sun. Anyway. But in reference to the zodiac, I think you have a 27 days. Yes, I'm now positive, and that's because that's why you have the nakshatras. In reference to the zodiac, the moon has a 27-ish day cycle. In reference to the sun, it has a 30-ish day cycle. That's why the menstruations are 28-ish day cycles. Which is kind of inconvenient because the months on the calendars are 30 and 31 days. So it makes it a little bit harder to track your stuff. All right. So what do we have so far? A woman can definitely obtain fruitful conception only when her menstruation happens when the moon is aspected by Mars and not in her upachayas. Now the third line. Drunken Tarot is saying, oh my God, my second daughter, same deal. The year before, they were both born on the 21st day of the month. That's interesting in itself. All right. Drishtesmin guruna nijo pachagaye kuryan shekam puman. So drishte is an aspect again. Asmin. Asmin is another confusing word, but it's because pronouns are a little confusing. We don't always know exactly what he's talking about, but it means this, in this. Guru na means from guru, by Jupiter. So now we should get a Jupiter aspect. So think about the mechanics behind what he's saying. When the menstruation happens, you should have a Mars aspect, because the menstruation is for bleeding. But when the insemination happens, then you should have a Jupiter aspect, because Jupiter is for childbirth, child production. It makes good sense. When the menstruation begins, then the moon should not be in an Upachaya house. But, see the next words? Nija Upachaya ga. It should be ga. No, it should be ge. Nija Upachaya ge. When the moon has gone to its own Upachaya, which is also a little confusing. But the part that's not confusing is, when it's menstruation, then you don't want Upachaya. When it's insemination, then you do want... What am I talking about? Insemination? Nishek Puman. The man should give the seed at this time. So there's a certain time when the woman should produce the egg, and then there's a certain time when the man should present the seed. The presentation of the egg is considered to begin by the removal of the previous one. So there's certain conditions for removing the previous egg, is that there should be Mars and no Upachaya. Because Mars makes blood, and Upachaya gets rid of things. Doesn't hold on to things. And then there's other considerations when the insemination should happen. It should be Upachaya, because Upachaya builds things up, and it should be Guru. Jupiter should be involved. Jupiter's for childbirth. So you got a 2. The man should inseminate when it goes to its Upachaya, and a Jupiter aspect is in this. So you see the kind of confusing thing here is there's quite a few pronouns. With pronouns, if you are very familiar with the subject, pronouns are very easy to use, but if it's new to you or something else, pronouns can be complicated. So what does its own mean in going to its own Upachaya? Does it mean that it goes to the man's Upachaya or the woman's? This part's not clear. Because, or it could mean, actually it could mean a third thing. Nija could mean its own. Oh, this is actually something to consider. This may be the real thing. So the word nija just means its own. So do we mean that the moon should be in the Upachaya house relative to the man's birth chart? Or does it mean we're talking asmin in this, which means in the woman's case? So, or does it mean that the moon should be in Upachaya house relative to the female's horoscope? Or does it mean, to what I think is probably the most accurate, it should be in its own? This is what it really means. So what does it mean it should be in its own Upachaya? This means a certain time of day. The transiting moon should be in the transiting Upachaya. So the ascendant should be a certain thing. You understand? So the menstruation is a certain way relative to the woman. I think. I mean, this verse is a little bit unclear. Maybe the menstruation should also... But menstruation doesn't happen on a moment, does it? Menstruation happens on a day. But insemination happens on a moment. So that can be timed to a muhurta. So now we can use the ascendant, and that's what I believe he's saying here. And the fourth line is supportive of that idea that he's talking about. He's narrowing it down to a certain muhurta and a day. So part one, it's important that the woman's cycle is good, and part two, when the egg gets fertilized is important. The conditions for when the egg should be fertilized is that the moon should be in its own 11th, 10th, 3rd, or 6th position from the ascendant. So that means that the conception should take place when the moon is in those positions. Depending on the phase of the moon, it would be a different time of day. But 10th would mean the moon is up high. 11th, a little bit more to the west, but still up high. 3rd means it's below the eastern horizon significantly. Like that. 6th means it's below the western horizon just a bit. And that moon should have Jupiter's aspect on it. So this makes it a little difficult actually to get a definite conception. Because you need, but not terribly difficult. It's not terribly difficult because the moon moves so fast. And you have a whole cycle in which you can fulfill this requirement. So the moon has to move into a place now away from Mars's aspect and now to Jupiter's aspect. Potentially they could both be on the same aspect. And then at the time of day when the moon is in these certain houses. Does this make sense? So I agree with Nomadic Sun. It's the moon's upachaya. That is the most literal reading. Libra says, my moon is not in any of those houses. We don't care. That's what we're saying. It doesn't matter. We're not talking about whether or not you're going to have babies. We're talking about when you can have a baby. So we're talking about the transiting moon. So it doesn't matter where the moon is in your chart. You want to be, you want to have the hoo-ha, hoopa-doo-boopa happen when the moon is in this particular position. What position? It's in an upachaya house with Jupiter's aspect. So ladies, make the men wait till the moon is in that position with Jupiter's aspect, and then you'll get a baby. But it will only really be certain if that also comes with the correct menstrual cycle, which is where the moon, which began when the moon wasn't in an upachaya house and had Mars's aspect. Or if you don't intend to have kids, make sure it's not happening in these conditions. Of course, check the moon phase. And Jennifer is saying the egg can only be fertilized during the trip from the ovaries through the fallopian tubes. I don't know about that. Oh, this all happens about over 14 days. Okay, after the first day for 14 days. According to him, it's not an issue. But he's going to make another point. He hasn't ruled that out. But he's going to make another point on the fourth line. So when during this cycle it goes into upachaya and has Jupiter's aspect, the man should inseminate. Now the fourth line is going to talk about things like what Jennifer Brantley just mentioned. Atyaje samaye shubhadika yute parvadi kalojite. So he says, Atyaje samaye shubhadika yute. You shouldn't ignore the other stuff that make a particular time auspicious or make a particular time work. Atyaje means don't forget about, don't ignore. Samaye, the general conditions, the other general principles of fertility. Shubhadika yute. that makes something very, very auspicious and effective. So he's saying, knowing everything else that you know about fertility, here's the extra secret. So, for example, Jennifer's, I guess this is the regular rhythmic technique thing. About 14 days, give or take, after the first day of menstruation. So if you get Jupiter aspecting the moon on a day after that, you're out of luck. Because he said, Atyaje samaje subadika yute. And then he also says, Parvadi kalojite. Don't also forget about the times that are generally not auspicious. So he says, discard uchita, the kalas, the moments, the times, like parva and so on. The times that are not auspicious. So what's a parva? Parva is like a ganda. Parva means a section of something. Mahabharata has 18 parvas and 100 subparvas. Parva means section. So when you say that this is on a parva, it means it's on a border or a juncture between things. Like maybe somebody, like a lot of children, we just heard from Drunken Tarot, born on the 21st. My second son born on the 21st. That's a parva birth. For the sun was on parva on that day, almost certainly, because by the zodiacs and the modern calendar, it's the 21st is 21st is the parva. So there's parvas for signs, the junctures between signs. The grand parvas are the ones between the water and the fire. That's also known as gandanta. The parvas can also be between nakshatras. But there's another important parva that you should bear in mind. It's the Trisandhya Parva, or especially the Dvisandhya Parva, or just Sandhya Parva. The parvas between the daytime and the nighttime. The sages have recommended strongly against conception during those parvas. They really emphatically advise against conception during sunset. You know, I guess it's supposed to be such a romantic, etc., etc., etc. But it's not good for the baby. And during sunrise, they recommend against conception during that time. So what he's saying here is, you also bear in mind things up like that. If you're getting the Jupiter aspected moon into an upachaya, but it's sunset, then don't do it then. That's going to mess up the thing. Or if it's sunrise, then don't do it then. Or if it's in another parva, a certain planet might be in parva, or the ascendant might be in parva. Parva just means the juncture between two things. Then avoid that one. Okay? So altogether, Shita Jyotishu Yoshito Nupachaya Sthane Kujenekshite Jatam Garba Palapradam Kaluraja Syat Anyata Nishpalam Drishtesmin Guruna Nijapachaya Ge Nijopachaya Ge Kuryan Nishekam Puman Atyaje samayeshu bhadika yute parvadika lochite. A woman can definitely obtain fruitful conception only when her menstruation happens when the moon is aspected by Mars, and while it is not in her upachayas. Is that justified to translate it like that? Sri Shita Jyotishu Yoshita Anupayachane Kujen. It's not clear if it's her upachayas or just upachayas, so let's leave it unclear. Probably it means her upachayas, unless you can actually realize the moment when it started. A woman can definitely obtain fruitful conception only when her menstruation happens when the moon is aspected by Mars and while it is not in upachayas. When, during this cycle, it goes into upachaya. During this cycle is the translation for us men. When, during this cycle, during this particular cycle, menstrual cycle, it goes into upachaya and has Jupiter's aspect, the man should do his job. Don't neglect other things that make a particular time auspicious. And discard inauspicious times like junctures. There you have it. The first principle for fertility astrology, and as I mentioned at the beginning, this is the bridge shlok. It's not a shlok, but this is the bridge statement to the 12th chapter, which we will begin next week, which is dedicated to this topic about having kids, how many kids, how healthy, how successful, etc. They're not going to be all on this particular topic of like when to get pregnant. We might see some of that come up in chapter 12, I'm not sure. But it's going to be more about how to predict the nature of the kids and how many kids and so forth, if there are kids, if this person is destined to have kids. So you have to bear that in mind. In some charts, some women are very fertile. So you might not need their menstruation to happen at a particular time, and you might not need to have the moon in a particular place when they're inseminated. They can just get pregnant anyway at any time. Some women are less fertile. Some women are very, very unfertile. Some are completely unfertile. And so the more unfertile the woman's natal chart, the more important it is to get the best, most advantageous time. And similarly with the men. Some men, for some reason, have very excellent little swimmers, and some don't. So depending upon the male who's got better Olympic athletes doesn't need assistance from techniques so much. It just happens easily or automatically. But the more that a person is finding it difficult to have a baby with, the more that a couple is finding it difficult to have a child without, by just having by just having sex, the more that they should look towards techniques, principles. And so the less naturally fertile the husband and wife are, the more important these techniques become. So this isn't saying you can't have a kid unless this happens. This is saying the most surest way to have a kid is when this happens. Tik. Any questions? We could probably, you could write code for this, make an app. It could be the baby alert app. You get a message on your phone. How would you run this app? You could have a button that says menses started, so you could tap that button, and then you could check the position. The app would check and tell you good cycle, not good cycle. And then if you got a good cycle, it's going to send you notifications. Today's possible. Or, it would show you, actually, then it should just show you the days. Or it would show you if the moon is going to have, not if, but when the moon would have Jupiter's aspects during that cycle. And then the times during those days. So that somebody who's an enterprising application developer, let me know if you want to partner up on that. I don't feel like coding it, but I can make sure that you get the Astro stuff right. Okay? So what do we have here for questions? Matane, arigato. See you later, Paul. Let me see. Katin Tekno says why. I'm sure she's referring to the parvas. Why does it adversely affect the baby? Yeah, why does it, or does it attract negative energy, or do they specify why sunrise or sunset is unfavorable? They actually do. It's a little bit, some people might consider it superstitious. And also maybe there's an explanation for this which is inclined to people who like superstitious kind of things versus the ones who are more like logical things. The logical reason is that during the parvas, one should worship the sun. During the sunrise and the sunset, it's very important to worship the sun. And therefore, you shouldn't be having sex then. You should be worshiping the sun with the mantras and the water and so forth. So it's not auspicious to do other things. It's not auspicious to do anything besides worship during the sunrise or the sunset. That's the logical reason. Or that's as logical as it gets. As far as I know. The superstitious reason is, this was explained. So there's an incident when, what was his name? Maybe it's Diti. Maybe it's Diti and Kashyapa. But one wife approached her sage husband and said, I'm still not pregnant. We've been married for a while. What are you doing? And he said, okay, I'll take care of that. And she said, yeah, take care of it, like now. And she said, this is a good cycle. This is a good month. And the women in these days would keep track of these things. And that's why they would go up to the male and say, this is a good time. They would say, Ritum Dehi. This rhythm is right. So she was telling him, Ritum, it's the right rhythm right now. Let's do it. And he said, it's not good right now. He was referring to the fourth line of this, or the fourth line of this was referring to his reply. It's not, because it's parva. So I don't care if the rest of the things are right. It's actually not the right time to do it right now. It was the sunset. And she was actually making him stop his dhyan, his meditation, to do that. So he said, don't worry, just wait 20 minutes. But for some reason, she was extremely impatient. I think she had waited way too long. He had neglected her for months or years. So she was tired of that. So she didn't want to hear wait 20 minutes. So he said, don't you know that Rudra moves during the sunrise and the sunset? So now, what does it mean that Rudra moves during the sunrise and the sunset? I remember when I was maybe 21 or something, I went to visit my parents. My dad at that time was just getting into the desert. He loved the desert. He still does. So they took me out to the desert to share their love of the desert with me. I'm not a big desert fan, but this was very impressive. The desert has these really big canyons and things that are very impressive. And we were there at 5 o'clock in the morning. And the maruts move at the sunrise and the sunset, for sure. And when you're in the desert, you notice it. The maruts are the rudras, and the maruts are you feel them in the earthly realm as the winds. So you'll notice that when the sun rises and the sun sets, there's an odd wind, which always happens. Technically, it's because you get this barometrical pressure change because the temperature is going to change drastically. But that's expressed in Vedic language as Rudra is moving. And if Rudra is moving, you don't want to attract attention. Because Rudra is the Bhuteshwar. He's the master of ghosts. And he's the master of demons and monsters. He's the master of monsters. So when Rudra, especially when Rudra as the Maruts is moving, the monsters are moving. So the monsters prowl. At sunrise, they return to their home, and at sunset, they leave the home. So this is why it's not good to conceive. This is the superstitious, let's say, reason for why it's not good to conceive in the parvas of the day. Because at that time, a bhut may possess the semen and then take advantage to take birth. That's what happened in this story with the sage. He said, okay, I give in. You want to get pregnant right now? All right. And then after the pregnancy, after the conception, she felt a little bit sorry that she had forced it. And she said, I'm sorry. He said, it's okay, but you're going to have babies that are monstrous. So she wound up giving birth to Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. The two initial really big bad guys in the universe. So that's the story of conception at Parvas. And it's also part of the explanation of Parvas. Like the better explanation, I mean the simpler explanation is you should be doing religious deeds at sunrise and sunset. You shouldn't be... I mean, conception is a religious deed, but it's not this particular category of religious deed, which you should be doing worship. Yeah. Gandhi had an experience like that. Mahatma Gandhi, he was having sex while his father died. And then he decided that he would not have sex anymore because he felt so bad that he was having sex when his father died. He should have been at his father's side. So the same thing, when the sun is rising and the sun is setting, you should pay attention to the sun. And you should offer respects to the sun. Then you should go and have fun after it. Okay? That was to answer Katin Tenko. Any other questions? Aito remembers that. There you go. So there's the story Jonathan was referring to. You know, the other thing is you shouldn't get too concerned about these things. And I'll tell you why. Have you ever worn white clothes? When you wear white clothes, you have to be very careful about spaghetti sauce. Or you have to be very careful about farming. Like you wouldn't be farming in white clothes, would you? Why? Because white clothes get dirty really easy. Do they? Spaghetti sauce, does it splash more on a white shirt than it does on a black shirt or a red shirt or a spaghetti sauce colored shirt? No, it doesn't really, but the difference is you don't see it. So when you have a person like Sage Kashyap and Diti Ma, Goddess Diti, that shirt is very white. And hence, anything that they do has a huge impact. they can do really wonderful things, make really right results, but if they mess up a little bit, it makes a big difference. Whereas people like us are very multicolored, spotted garments. You hear this stuff about the effect of garlic on the concentration of your mind, the effect of onions, the effect of mushrooms, and you can't even notice it. You hear the effect about sunrise, sunset. You can barely notice these things. Why? Because they're not true? They're true, but because you can't notice it. Because the spaghetti sauce spilled on your shirt, but it doesn't make that much difference because there's already so much other stuff on your shirt. Yeah, it's like my son's room. It's a mess. So once it's a mess, he doesn't even notice when he makes more mess. But after it's clean, then he notices. So in the same way, these days with people like us, it really doesn't make that much of a dramatic difference. Whether you're born in a parva, conceived on a parva, conceived in an inauspicious moment, conceived in an inauspicious moment, because there's so much other junk mixed in already. Did you even do any preparation for the conception? Did you perform tapas? Did you perform years of tapas, significant rigorous tapas, building up the power to produce an effect that's exactly according to what you want? No, you didn't, and we didn't. I never did. Just got married and had kids. So that's why you don't have to get that worried about whether or not you conceived at sunrise or sunset. But if you start to consider it proactively, then your shirt will start to get whiter. And you might say, I would prefer to have a messy shirt because then I don't have to worry about sunrise or sunset, but then you have to worry about messy results. And so it's worth it to have a clean room. And it's worth it to gradually make those efforts, these little efforts that contribute to self-purification, because then you become more expert and efficient in your actions. Okay. What else we got? It said he isn't saying more clearly. I think he said it fairly clearly. Did I get frozen? No, that's just me looking at this. He said it pretty clearly, actually. We sorted it out. So just to reply, a woman can definitely obtain fruitful conception only when her menstruation begins when the moon is aspected by Mars and while it is not in upachayas. Does it make it? Is there any uncertainty in there? There's a little bit of uncertainty. Does it mean the woman's moon is aspected by Mars or the transiting moon is aspected by Mars? Does it mean the moon is in the woman's upachayas or just in its own upachayas? Well, you don't have. Well, if you remember, the basic Vic lessons are do cumulative analysis. Cumulative analysis is more accurate than spot analysis. So why not just take this as an opportunity to have accumulation of facts? Or it could be either or it can be if you have both, that's even more amazing. So sometimes things are intentionally vague because all the vagaries are valid. A woman can definitely attain fruitful conception only when her menstruation happens when the moon is aspected by Mars and while it is not in upachayas. When during this cycle, it goes into upachaya, and here it definitely says nidra upachaya. So here he's definitely talking about its transiting house. which means you can select a 2-hour period for ideal insemination. Insemination, that word is so weird. Conception, active conception. Okay? When during the cycle it goes into Upachaya and has Jupiter's aspect, which isn't going to be rare because during a month it will happen 4 times at peak, and it will be reasonably under Jupiter's aspect for 7 or 8 days any month. So it's not terribly rare. It's not like you're going to have to wait years and years and years to meet these conditions. This is actually a pretty interesting principle. When during this cycle it goes into Upachaya and has Jupiter's aspect, that's when the man should inseminate. Nishek. Don't neglect other things that make a particular time auspicious, or don't neglect other things about fertility. And discard inauspicious times like junctures. Okay? Very interesting bit today, yes? Yeah, so next chapter we'll talk more about kids. Next chapter will be dedicated to kids. Thank you, everybody. I'll see you next week for that. And I'll see you in 2 days for Bhagavatam.